Digital ROMs, what would we do without them? Having the ability to grab a copy of, I don't know, Altered Beast, along with a few other titles, and slide them into your EverDrive is an essential part of life today. Can you imagine how much more expensive retro collecting would be without them? It doesn't bear thinking about. But where did all those ROMs come from? They seem to have been about for quite a while. I remember even in the 90s there were CDs with Mega Drive and Super Nintendo ROMs just ripe for the picking. Well, a good proportion of them actually came out of this. This is the Super Magic Drive by Front Far East Industrial Corporation and released in 1991, and it allows you to transfer Mega Drive cartridges to and from 3.5-inch floppy. And I bloody love floppy disks, so this, well, it's magic, and it would definitely have seemed like that in the 90s. Front Far East Industrial had been around since 1983, operating from New Taipei City, popping up during the Taiwan Miracle, an economic boom when their information industry was growing significantly and supplying many Western tech companies directly. Its owner, Mr. Meng Ming Liu, was an eclectic fellow in the electronic world with enough business acumen to follow the trends without worrying too much which side of the law they might be used for. One of their first projects was to exclusively distribute one of the first Apple IIe clones, the Acer Microprocessor 3, subsequently becoming a game developer for this platform. Alongside this, they focused on computer peripherals and game console accessories through to the start of the 90s. This is when they used their knowledge to create something which they knew all too well might cause some fury among the big names in the field. Building a system capable of backing up your Mega Drive ROMs was one of these, and as a Western consumer, if you wanted to get hold of one back in the 90s, then you had to know some pretty specialised contacts. The contacts were likely the same contacts responsible for the booming PC Engine import market in the West, which I heard about so much but sadly had little hands-on experience with. Another route would be through a specialist, such as National Console Support, who could be phoned or faxed if you were aware of them. In fact, they're still operating until this day, which is pretty astounding. Alternatively, you could connect up to a bulletin board system such as Mafia, which not only supplied Super Magic drives, but also formed a repository for the ROMs themselves. This particular bulletin board was actually the centre of a legal case with Sega, which I'll come back to after we've looked at the Magic Drive itself and got an understanding of exactly how it works and what it can do. So here we have the Super Magic Drive. On the back are two connectors, which fit a 25-pin parallel cable. One can connect to a special floppy drive which has bespoke wiring. You can't connect any old floppy up to this. The other is a bidirectional parallel port that can connect directly to your PC's parallel port, which we'll get to later. For now, I'll connect up the floppy drive, which requires its own power supply. Incidentally, a standard Mega Drive power adapter works fine here. Slot the Magic Drive into the Mega Drive, switch it on, and away we go, noting the tiny hole cut out to allow the power light to shine through. Nice. Like the original Master System converter, this is made for the first version of the Mega Drive. Also, like the Master System converter, the Magic Drive actually boots into the Mega Drive's Z80 Master System mode, as you can probably tell by this menu system, which, as you'd expect, only makes use of the directional arrows and the B and C buttons of the Mega Drive control pad, just like a Master System. So what do we get? Well, we've got the option to play either disc, cassette, by which it means cartridge, or backup test. Play disc, as you might imagine, enables you to load a ROM from a floppy disk. Now, this was actually sent to me a couple of years ago by a viewer called Andrew Nielsen, who included this massive box of backed up games. Look at this absolute treasure trove. We could load up The Pagemaster, Moonwalker, Spider-Man, Clax, Ranger X, Revenge of Shinobi, Prince of Persia, or any of these other titles. There's too much to choose from. So let's begin with Moonwalker and Spider-Man. Now, despite what the label says, this disc has 3 ROMs loaded onto it and you can choose between them. The drive will then whir into action and Moonwalker is loaded into the memory of the Magic Drive. It then plays exactly the same as if you had the cartridge inserted. There are no loading times because the entire ROM is loaded into the Magic Drive's RAM. In fact, even if you reset the Mega Drive, it remains loaded just like you're resetting the game as normal. If you want to load something else, then simply power off the Mega Drive and you're back in the main menu. Now, on this iteration, Magic Drive files are actually broken into 512 kilobyte segments, so if you have a cartridge with a ROM of less than 4 megabits, it can fit inside a single file. Anything more and it'll be broken into several files and if necessary span several disks, but you are restrained by the limits of the Magic Drive memory. Early Magic Drives only had 8 megabits of memory, which wasn't upgradable. Later editions had 16 megabits, which could be upgraded to 24, and there's even rumour of a 32 megabit model. Thankfully, I've got an upgraded version with the latest BIOS, 4.1a and 24 megabits of RAM, meaning it can load a game broken into 6 separate segments. And yes, this includes the almighty Street Fighter II Champion Edition, which has a 3 megabyte ROM, or if you multiply it by 8 to get bits, a 24 megabit ROM. As identified this time by the word card on screen. Nice. Interestingly, my Magic Drive can format high density discs to 1.6 megabytes rather than the traditional 1.44, allowing Street Fighter II to fit on just 2 floppies. It feels weird how transposable the floppy is with a cartridge game. In the 90s they felt miles apart, but this gives you an idea of how similar they were. They're just storage mediums. Of course, floppies lack the speed advantage of fast ROM chips. There we go. You can also use the backup test from the main menu to load a cartridge straight into the Magic Drive's memory and test if a game is compatible. Although this feature isn't on all devices, different Magic Drives have different BIOSes and have different features, and although mine is the latest, the limited BIOS size of 8 kilobytes means some features are actually missing from previous BIOS updates. But all in all, I'd probably say this is the best BIOS version to still have. So what else can this bad boy do? Well, if we flick over to the other menu, we have the option to back cartridges up to floppy, and so we get our lovely little ROM files. Let's try one of the best games of all time, Rise of the Robots, another 24 megabit cartridge. And it really is one of the best games of all time. Interestingly, the button input is so sensitive that it's hard to give a reasonable file name. I presume one of the capture components has gone a little wonky after all this time. But anyway, the Magic Drive will take your input name and then sequentially order each segment until the backup is complete. If it runs out of room on a floppy, you can insert a new one, press retry, and the image is continued. Nice. That's Rise of the Robots for the Mega Drive on just 2 floppy disks. What more do you need in life? Apart from a kick in the teeth, maybe. Now, the Magic Drive actually outputs files into the SMD format, although it saves them with numerical extensions rather than .smd. This format is a little different from a standard binary dump. Essentially, at the top we get a 512-byte header, followed by 16K blocks of interleaved 68,000 program data, each block containing an 8K section of even bytes and an 8K section of odd bytes. It's quite easy to convert this into a pure binary format. It's also quite easy to combine these files into a single SMD file using an appropriate utility so that you can load it in your average everyday emulator. Talking of utilities and emulation makes me want to hook this up to a PC. So first up, I'll need a suitable PC. The trusty Packard Bell will do just fine. I'll need to connect the parallel cable up to the Magic Drive's COM port, and then into the parallel port on the back of the PC. I'll also need to ensure that it's set to IRQ7 and is operating in bi-directional mode, which it is. We're then good to go. First, I'll try a Windows utility called RBDU, or ROM Backup Device Utility, by Alpha 2 Productions. This can connect up to not only the Magic Drive, but also the Super Magicom or Super Wildcard. So with my setup, it could boot the inserted cartridge at the press of a button, which was nice, and gather some rudimentary information about the cartridge, but that's about it. So instead, let's go to Faithful DOS and SMD Util, or Super Magic Drive Transfer Utility by Charles McDonald. This is better. Here we have many command line options, and importantly, we can save the cartridge ROM to a file in one rapid process. Also, we can feed a ROM into the Super Magic Drive using an equally as simple command. Nice. It feels strange controlling a Mega Drive from DOS, but quite compelling. Out of interest, if we take a peek at a disk formatted using the Super Magic Drive, we can see that DOS can actually read the 1.6 megabyte disk. And there's our Street Fighter 2 files. If we want to load them back from here, we need to combine them into one file. But the beauty of using a PC is the ability to save bigger cartridge ROMs than even 24 megabits, if you want to. Although I was experiencing quite a lot of timeout issues. Maybe it's something to do with the hardware I'm using. Interestingly, we can also inject Master System ROMs in BIOS mode at a particular address. This proved less successful on my attempts. However, I've heard rumours that the Mega Drive can actually play Master System games with somewhat mixed success. Presumably because it's already using the Master System mode of the Mega Drive itself when it's trying to load a game. But we'll give it a go. To do this, we need to inject a Mega Drive header into the Master System ROM, in my case using a utility called tsggmd, which, as you can see by the size of the original file, sonic.sms, and the modified file, sonicmd.sms, simply adds the 512 byte header into the top of a file. Then we can either load it through the PC or through the standard floppy drive. I'm going to copy this across to the floppy and see what we get. So here we are, we can see the file, but on loading it just crashes the Magic Drive. The same thing happens with other Master System ROMs, such as ALF, which is such a shame. We can even try Game Gear ROMs using the same process, which it kind of works. Here's Double Dragon, albeit with some serious glitching and colour issues, but apparently other people have had more success, perhaps with previous firmware versions. But I'm not going to keep playing around. I think it's time to move on. So what else can we or can't we do? Well, naturally games with built-in specialised chips can't run through a copy. In fact, take Virtua Racing. The Magic Drive doesn't even recognise it as a game cartridge. We can, however, run games from other regions, as it also acts as a multi-region pass-through. Here's an NTSC version of Super Monaco Grand Prix, which now works beautifully. If I were to run this on a standard PAL Mega Drive, the game would be in black and white. And here's a Japanese version of something else, which not only fits but plays. Lovely stuff. We can also run games with save states. The Super Magic Drive has a built-in battery, specifically to hold this information, which you can then write to disk and reload before loading up the actual game. If we look inside, we can see the battery. Oh, Jesus Christ. These bloody things are the bane of a retro collector's life. If you have a Super Magic Drive, for the love of God, please make sure you get rid of this leaky battery nightmare before it eats away the traces. Okay, with that fixed, we can see the BIOS there. We've got a Motorola floppy controller over there, a logic chip there, SRAM here, and this board contains the DRAM. These boards have a couple of different revisions, at the very least, but you know, you can look into that in your own time. Anyway, let's get this back together and test a few more things. Does it work with the Master System converter? Well, the original version doesn't fit, and even if we had the second version, as we've already discussed, the Magic Drive has a few issues running Master System games, although yours might work better. Does it work with Sonic and Knuckles? Well, no, it doesn't even see the cartridge. Does it work with an Action Replay cartridge or Game Genie? Nope, it just hangs, although I've heard that it is possible to use the Magic Drive with these so-called gold finger codes. Does it work with that Feng Hao Chinese HD Mega Drive clone? No, because the cartridge slot is housed too low in the case for it to reach. Does it work with an analog Mega SG? I'm pretty certain it will, but I haven't unboxed mine yet, so we'll do that when I get round to reviewing it. Does it work with a Mega Drive or Genesis too? Well, no, the shape prevents it from fitting properly. Does it work with a Genesis 3? No, because that particular version doesn't have Master System mode. Does it work with an EverDrive cartridge? No, it doesn't work with an EverDrive cartridge. Does it work with a Sega 32X? Oh come on, you know it doesn't, let's just move on. So what about all this legal malarkey? Well, it was back in 1993 that a case was brought by Sega Enterprises Limited against Mafia, a bulletin board system operated by Chad Sherman out of San Francisco, California. Chad was the average BBS type character, going under the username Brudjo Digital. But he also ran a business called Parsec Trading, which, as well as owning a network of linked bulletin boards, sold Super Magic Drives. Chad used Mafia to sell Super Magic Drives to those seeking this elusive treasure, but Mafia was also used to host various Sega Genesis and Mega Drive ROMs, which some of the 400 or so users had uploaded after making a copy from their Super Magic Drives. After an anonymous tip, Sega sought to establish direct infringement under Section 106 of the Copyright Act. This was made easier because some of the ROMs held on Mafia, although not all, held US copyright registration. In fact, at the time of the case, the bulletin board contained 28 Sega games. 6 of those were beta pre-releases, and only 2 had registered copyrights. These were Jurassic Park and Sonic Spinball. Sega had discovered this by having an employee gain access to the BBS under a pseudonym with the assistance of the informant. In December 1993, Sherman's computers were seized and the Sega games were extrapolated. Information obtained from the BBS confirmed that Sherman knew that copies of the games were being uploaded and shared with the bulletin board, and indeed had even facilitated the process. The fact that Sherman was selling Super Magic Drives, which went hand in hand with this behaviour, demonstrated a commercial aspect, and combined with the 10 megabytes of free downloads available each month, the case was pretty sealed. Sega would obtain an injunction against Sherman under copyright, trademark and state trade name law, preventing the return of Sherman's computer equipment in order to minimise the threat of continued violations. Although Sherman wasn't liable for direct infringement, as it couldn't be proved he directly caused the copying. But he was for contributory infringement, with the Mafia BBS directly infringing Sega's copyright. Sherman's fair use defense was about as watertight as a YouTuber uploading a full movie and declaring it for fair use educational purposes. Sherman's claims that the Super Magic Drives were supplied for backup purposes was also dismissed, given that no one would pay $350 to back up cartridges which are notoriously reliable in the first place. And so, following the case of Nintendo of America versus Dragon Pacific International, where damages were awarded to Nintendo following Dragon's distribution of NES compilation game cartridges, $5,000 of damages was awarded to Sega for each copyright infringement, thus totaling $10,000 on top of legal fees. The damages could have amounted to treble if Sega could provide evidence of damaged profits. However, naturally they could not prove it because it was such a negligible impact. Ultimately, this case not only helped stem the tide of ROM distribution at the time, it also had implications for other bulletin boards and even around ISP liability for infringements that occur through their networks. Ultimately, as we know, it certainly didn't stop piracy, however, with it remaining most rife among the naturally disk-based computers of the time. As 16-bit platforms died off, it was up to other wizards to come up with ways of breaking the piracy measures of consoles such as the Saturn, PlayStation and even N64, and then finding ways to distribute them. Riveting as they are, these stories are for another time. Of course, the Super Magic Drive wasn't the only copying device for the Mega Drive, with others including the chunky and alluring Mega Disk Interceptor, which looks like a bloody transformer. You could also get variants of the Magic Drive for the Super Nintendo and even PC Engine, if that's your thing. Although I certainly wouldn't want Nintendo lurking behind me as I made backups of their games. Anyway, that's all for this Magic Fest. Thanks for watching. Have a great evening.
If you have any knowledge of the manufacture or sale of counterfeit film and video product or related software, please call our UK hotline on 020 8568 6646 or in the Republic of Ireland 01 882 8565. Your support can end the distribution of poor quality product.
Don't let the pirates burn a hole in your pocket.